Sounds good.
Amazing. All right, we are all ready for some vote. Oh, there are already people coming in. Amazing. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to hang out here for a minute or two to allow all of the folks who are planning on attending to make their way in as if we were here in person. Take a seat, you know.
Get your coffee, all the whatever.
Exactly. All that good stuff. All that good stuff. I'm going to share my screen too so that we have the slides up so people know what they've come for. Oh, goodness. All right, cool. I also have to quit all of the things that are going to send me notifications so that I don't get distracted.
So you're saying you're going to have to quit all your tabs, like my 50 million Chrome tabs that will slow my computer down.
Seth, you know me well enough to know that like I have 50 million tabs open just all the time. I would lose my entire brain if I didn't have my 50 million tabs.
Yeah, the worst, I mean, I have a Mac, so like the worst moment I think in my professional career is whenever I'm like in Chrome and I'm trying to close one window and I hit Command Q instead of W, and then I'm like, I might as well just quit my job.
Like, I'm done. Today is over. Let's just wrap it up. I'm out of here.
Yeah, not just the day. I'm like, well, you might as well fire me because I will not recover from this. Yeah, exactly.
There's no possible way I will ever financially recover from this. Oh my goodness. Awesome. Well, as I'm sure all of the folks who are joining can tell, Seth and I work together very regularly. So that's why we know each other's tab histories very well. But thank you all so much for joining today. We're super excited for you to be attending this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and also, it's already recording. So that's perfect. I just wanted to make sure that I had that running. But I think since this will undoubtedly be a lovely and spirited conversation, we may as well kind of dive in and get started with some quick introductions and kind of let people know what they're here for, basically. But you are here attending a lovely webinar on Unibuddy Community. I know that there are folks in the audience who may have attended the webinar that we did with South Wales University in the mid part of January. Some of this stuff will be a little bit of review for you all, so just be prepared for that. But we do have some fun little nuggets of new information in here for you as well. So don't feel like, oh, I'm going to click out of here because I've heard all of this before. And also Seth wasn't here last time. So you've got a whole other story.
I was listening. I was lurking in the background.
There we go. So you were in fact here last time. You just will also get to rehear all of the fun information about community that we talked about last time, which is awesome. And also, Yusuf did a great job of utilizing the chat function, which I was going to recommend everybody take advantage of. So we will be sending out recordings of this after to all of the folks who've registered. So you don't have to take voracious notes. You can just hang out with Seth and I, and you will get the recording afterward. So without further ado, we're going to just jump into the agenda for today. So basically, the plan is to talk a little bit about Unibuddy Community, what it is and how it works. That's going to be my part. And then we're also, like I said, going to talk a little bit about what's new as well, all of those new and exciting things that you can get stoked about utilizing. And then Seth here is going to be talking about the way that Indiana Bloomington, or IU Bloomington, as we will probably call it throughout the presentation, used community in this past kind of few months. So we're really excited to hear this conversation today, and please do feel free if you have questions as the two of us go to add those in the chat for Seth as well. And then as a last little fun nugget, we're also going to give you some sneak peeks into things that will be coming up in the community feature as well. So Seth, this could even be new fun information for you. So awesome. Just brief introductions of the two folks who have been chatting your ear off already for a few minutes here. My name is Paige, and I am a senior customer success manager here at Unibuddy. I've been with the company for about 2 years, but before that I worked in higher education. So been on your side of the desk, and I really love my job because it means that I get to still stay connected to higher education, which I have a big passion for. But Seth, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Seth Walker. I'm an Associate Director of International Admissions here at IU Bloomington. If you're not familiar with IUB, we're a really, really large public research institution, about 46,000 students, 36 of whom are undergraduate students, and about somewhere between 5 to 7% of those are international students. So yeah, we welcome a class every year of somewhere between 300 to 400 students, 500 if we're lucky and there's no pandemic. So yeah, that's kind of the population we're dealing with when it comes to international students at IU. So yeah, I lead most of the recruitment here at Bloomington for international folks. No domestic work no US work in our portfolio. So it's exclusively international. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate it. All right. So we're going to just chat really quickly for the folks on the call who may not have heard anything about Unibuddy Community at this point. So basically, you may be asking yourself, what is Unibuddy Community? Like, what are we all here to talk about today? And Unibuddy Community is essentially a group messaging app that we created to add to the Unibuddy kind of set of products that allows you to encourage your prospective and admitted students to interact with each other, as well as your ambassadors and staff members. Essentially, the desire here is to do what it says on the tin and really create community amongst those people, right? And create an official safe space for those students to connect before they come to campus, or even potentially after they come to campus as well. And essentially, we really think that the value of this community space in our modern and kind of like still pandemic-y, but also kind of not pandemic-y world is that it really gives students this opportunity to feel like they are part of something virtually and even before they get to your campus, because we all know that at the end of the day, the special sauce is really wanting to make students feel like they belong where you are. And so essentially, we want to keep them connected from that first moment that you engage with them as a prospective student in their kind of pre-university days, all the way to graduation. And the main community does that is that it facilitates this safe space for students to meet, and students are able to actually get answers kind of from each other as well as from your professional staff member, and they can really find their people too, right? That's super important at the end of the day, being able to say like, oh great, there will be another individual who's like me at this institution, and I feel like I'm part of this campus before I've even arrived there. And Unibuddy Community basically works by within your Unibuddy instance, you're able to set up these community spaces and create group chats underneath them. Right here, you've got a good example of an international advice channel within a larger Unibuddy community. You are allowed to create as many of those communities as you would like to within your Unibuddy dashboard, and you invite the students from there as well. So it's definitely a really great way to allow those students to connect and allow you to have a good kind of oversight of those groups as well. All right, so for the folks who attended last time, we wanted to give you a little bit of an update on the things that are new within communities. So very exciting situations here. We've got multiple communities which launched fairly recently. I kind of alluded to that a moment ago, but essentially it allows you to create multiple communities within your Unibuddy instance. So you could have a community that's focused on prospective students for the class of 2027, which every time I say that, I like freak out a little bit because it's like 2027. Oh my gosh. And then you could also have a community that is focused on your admitted students for the class of 2026, which is the one that you're enrolling right now. We've also added GIFs or GIFs. You can go either way. I'm a big proponent of kind of not leaning into saying GIFs because I feel like it sounds like peanut butter, and I'm just I'm just not about that. But I am a millennial, so I could have full conversations in GIFs as far as I'm concerned. And so it's very exciting now that students are actually able to add in those GIFs to kind of enhance their conversations. And then we've also added on the back end of the dashboard a table of invited users. So you can really keep track of those students that you've actually invited into the community space, and you can see who's joined and who hasn't, which is pretty awesome. And last but not least, we're going to show a little bit more about this later, but we've also added template groups. So this is essentially an opportunity for you if you're kind of saying, oh, I don't know exactly how to set up a group around retention. Now you have an opportunity to click on a template group, and one's kind of pre-built for you just to make your life a little easier at the end of the day. And essentially, what we want to do here is really encourage you to think about ways that you can utilize community throughout the student journey as well. So there are a lot of opportunities here, first of which we always like to say is the selection phase. So this is going to be early in the prospect journey when they're actually saying like, okay, my name is Paige and I'm really curious about looking around at all of these different universities. Oh, I have this invite to actually go into a Unibuddy community and interact with other prospective students who are also looking at this university. So it's really helpful for students who maybe want to get a vibe of a campus before they actually come to visit and all of that good stuff. The secondary place where you can utilize community is really in this belonging space. So this is kind of once you have a cohort of students who have been admitted and you really want them to be able to interact with each other and kind of understand that there are folks out there who share their interests, that they can talk about the majors or areas of study that they might be interested in. They could also begin the conversations around like housing and accommodation, and really start building those friendships and by way of that affinity with your institution as well. And then another really, I think, fun use case potential for the Unibuddy community space is orientation, right? I think this is a really logical space to kind of extend this journey into the enrollment period. So we've got the opportunity for you to really include a lot of information about how to access financial aid, maybe what to bring to orientation if you have a multi-day orientation period, maybe the opportunities to also kind of figure out who your roommate might be or all of that good stuff. You could also share the agenda for the day during orientation. In my brain, I feel like there's a lot of logic to potentially creating Unibuddy groups that are each of the orientation groups. So you have an orientation leader in each one, and students are able to ask questions that they have on those groups as well. So lots of really cool opportunities there. And last but not least is, of course, the retention and yield piece. I know something that we talk a lot about here in the US is summer melt and really trying to figure out how to re-engage students during that period of time, because they do tend to kind of float off, if you will. So having a community space where they can talk to each other, the admitted and students who are going to be coming to campus can talk about, you know, what type of residence halls they're going to be living in. Maybe if they didn't figure out who their roommate was going to be at orientation, they could try and figure that out within the community space, as well as just kind of keeping students up to date on the forms that you need from them, whether or not that's deadlines that they need to sign up for orientation by, all of this good stuff. So that just gives you a little bit of an overview of ways that we see potential for community to be used in your student journeys, if you will. But Seth, I'm sure people are really tired of listening to me talk, and they came to hear you at the end of the day. And so I'm going to send this over to you. I will drive the slides for you. So just let me know when you would like me to move forward. But over to you, my friend.
Cool. Yeah, we're talking about the webinar, and then we think maybe the best way to go forward is just to kind of do a little show and tell you about exactly what IU Bloomington used Unibuddy communities for, where we kind of started the process, and then what we've seen as some successes and some challenges throughout the process and where we're looking to go forward. So that's what hopefully will be helpful for y'all as you think about how community might be able to be applied in your scenario, knowing that ours is likely different, but hopefully we can trade knowledge and have kind of like, not a group think, because that's a negative connotation, but have something where you can glean some information from us and hopefully the other way around as well. So to tell you about where we're coming from, we really approached rolling out community as a trial and error as our main goal to see how things worked. We usually kind of err on the other side where we feel like everything's got to be perfect. It's all have to be set up exactly the way we wanted to. And so we kind of took a different approach with community to see if we could roll something out, see what worked, see what didn't, learn from the mistakes we made and celebrate the successes. So that's really where we were coming from. We don't know if we had it figured out. We still don't know if we have it figured out, but we kind of tried to start somewhere to see what was working for us. So previously, before we did any of the community work, we had WhatsApp, maybe like many of you all, we had WhatsApp, WeChat communities or groups that we would invite admitted students to, maybe a little bit passive. Maybe there was an international student ambassador in there, maybe there wasn't. So that's where we were coming from. And then we moved to community because it made a lot of sense for us. We thought it would allow, and it did allow, a greater involvement of international student ambassadors because they're already familiar with the Unibuddy platform and they're in there consistently to answer their individual questions. And we also really, really love the ability for it to maintain privacy and safety for both our international student ambassadors as well as our admitted students. That was one of the big hesitancies of jumping on board with something like WhatsApp or WeChat, is now we're throwing out our international student ambassadors' personal cell phone numbers to a bunch of minors, which, as you can imagine, going either way, it just causes a little bit of rightful hesitancy by both students probably and family members, as well as us, to put ourselves out there in that way. So that's kind of where our trialing and erroring began, was we thought this would be a good way to move over to community to see how that works. So in the next slide, we'll tell you a little bit about what the beginning looked like. We wanted to start by doing, and I think on the next slide, you'll see what our pilot community
Look at me,
is.
I'm not a good driver. I'm so sorry. You're like, Paige, change the slide. I'm like, yes.
So what we wanted to start with, we want to start with prospective students, simply to see what it would be like. We started with a group of sub-Saharan African students or prospective students and we had a collection of names. It was actually very, very difficult to engage with these students. I think the lessons learned that we had were the group that we started with were names that we had acquired, whether it was purchasing names or whether working with CBOs in the area, to have students who would kind of meet or fit the Indiana University profile, but hadn't already expressed interest in IUB. I think that was a big hurdle that we had to overcome, to have someone who maybe had never heard of our university, or if they'd heard of us, had not actually shown interest, and we're asking them to engage in this community. And that may have been a level that was a little bit too much for them. So that caused us to think about, in the future, which we'll get to later, but rolling out something of how do I attract, or what do I do that shows value to this community if there is no value inherent in it because they're interested in the university in the first place. The second little point you'll see there's about hesitancy to roll out and like a large scale. One of the reasons we started with sub-Saharan Africa was we wanted I don't know, for lack of a better term, like a control group, a group that we weren't saying, let's invite all 5,000, 6,000 of our international applicants or the tens of thousands of names we have in our CRM. We didn't know what the involvement would be like, what the commitment for our international student ambassadors or our staff were. So we wanted to start somewhere small, which was one of the reasons why we started with such a small group. But yeah, that was kind of where we started with it. It was a good way to get used to the platform, and it was a good way to start some of those conversations, but it definitely wasn't as involved as I think we thought it was going to be, which was a reflection on our assumptions more so than I think the students we were dealing with. But that was one lesson we learned.
Yeah, I think this is such a cool way to like think about this too. And I remember when we were talking about this rollout initially, like it was a good idea to just give it a try, right? Because like ultimately, if you didn't try anything at all, it would have been like, well, what are we going to do with this thing? Right. So
For
I
sure.
think I was really like very inspired by both you and Reed to just like, let's give it a shot, because that's
Yeah.
ultimately like a really forward thinking and awesome way to go about utilizing a thing like
Well,
this.
it's also
And I'm not just
like
saying.
it, no, thank you. It caused us, we really wanted to like stretch ourselves a little bit more too,
Yeah.
as opposed to the norm. Like this would allow us to have a bit more reflection on what activities we do, especially coming out of the pandemic or in the midst of the pandemic, being able to stretch the activities that we do virtually to see what else we're kind of missing
Totally.
in the whole process. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Makes a lot of sense.
if you go to the next slide, it'll show kind of some of the areas of why experimentation was so with the platform was so easy to do for us.
Mhm.
Once you all allowed us to have a bit more control in inviting student groups, it allowed us a bit more, I think, a little bit more experimentation or creativity. It wasn't an all or
Yeah.
nothing. So it allowed us to say, oh, we could limit it to a certain area, a certain type of student, that we could identify from demographics or whatever application information that we had in our CRM. And so that really allowed us to think a bit more creatively about what we were going to use community for, which is really, really nice. I
Totally.
think the second aspect, experimentation, but the second aspect when you're thinking about like proof points that Unibuddy and the community allowed us to enhance even more was the ability to go through data-driven evidence for whatever activities, recruitment activities we were hoping to do. But it also, which we weren't really expecting, but it was a great, which you'll see a slide in a bit about this, it also supplied us with really, really great narrative insight into our applicants. So as I'm sure most of you on the call, yeah, I'm sure you have like this, I don't know, it's not Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, but it's like you have these administrators who want the best. Yeah, they want two things. It's like on one day they might be really warmed up to these stories of students and they want to hear that a student asked about this specific thing and an ISA member came in and told about their experience as an internship or taking this class or being a peer tutor, and they want to have that narrative anecdotal evidence. And then the next day or 20 minutes later or in the same meeting, they want to also balance that with this data that can come from, that's difficult to acquire from a WhatsApp or a WeChat where you have to do manual counting and there's not reports that come out. But since this is in Unibuddy, it would, and especially going forward, it will allow for a lot more of both of those as long as you have folks in the community that can chronicle some of those narrative stories and then also pull some of that data-driven proof and evidence. So that's one of the two reasons, main reasons why we were really, really excited about what this could do for us.
Awesome. I love that. Makes so much sense, right? Okay, so now we're going to talk about what you did after this. So round two, in terms of your kind of our second push, if you will, to say what's next. So I'll go to the next slide without making you
so we learned whatever lessons, we learned whatever lessons we had, and then we said, okay, now we had this prospective student experience that was good in a lot of ways. We made connections, but not the volume of connections we were hoping for. They were meaningful when we did make them, but it was a little bit quieter than we thought. And now we're like, okay, let's move to a different group that has demonstrated a bit more affinity to the university. Let's go with admitted students. We chose to segment these groups based on region, and the rationale behind that, right or wrong, was that the size of the admit populations within those countries, these are three of the biggest populations that Indiana University Bloomington serves. So we thought, okay, we'll have a good number of students that we can invite. As we were getting this around, we were anticipating coming out of the pandemic and being able to travel to these three areas. We're 1 for 3 when it comes to being able to travel these areas. I was going to ask about that. But we're really expecting that community would allow, the tool would allow us a place to bring together not only student questions individually, but then to promote the travel that we were planning to do to these areas. So that's another reason why it was segmented by region. We thought it would be great to say, oh, we'll be in your area in the next coming weeks. We should totally set up a meeting. We thought this would be a really, really great place for that to happen. And we also thought that would be a good chance for admitted students to coordinate and collaborate in country with each other, whether that mean they would meet up and try to find roommates, have some coffee or little group meetings that they could organize themselves, maybe finding roommates, maybe travel planning for the fall. So we thought being in a geographically centralized location would allow for maybe a bit more of the Unibuddy virtual connections to bleed into in-person physical connection, which I think would be really, really cool. So that was our rationale behind dividing them into those three areas.
All right.
Yeah, the next slide will.
Next slide.
Yeah, we had good success with all three, but definitely our Indian group was the most active, was the most vibrant, was the most back and forth. And so focusing on them, talking about kind of the successes, they definitely were more active than the prospective students. Prospective students was a little bit more transactional. What's your minimum TOEFL, and then pop out, or what's the blah, 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 and pop out. For these students, understandably, and I'm sure everybody would guess this, they were much more interested in connecting, much more interested in having questions beyond that were not transactional. The conversations were really organic. People were talking about their hobbies, what majors they were hoping to study. One of the challenges, as you see, was that we definitely had a time zone challenge, and we had this latency issue, I guess you would call it, where we would be waking up and we would be seeing the 70, 80 messages that were going back and forth. So our ISA members, our international student ambassadors, and our staff members weren't really able to have that live feel. So we'll talk about lessons learned in a little bit later, but that was one of the big challenges where it felt kind of like, is this just the app version of an email where students are asking a bunch of stuff and then we're chiming in while they're asleep, and then so that was one thing that we'll try to overcome as we progress. And then on the right, you'll see some of the demographics that we had, or some of the data, the number of folks that we had in the platform. We invited just a shade over 400 for this group. So about 83 of that 420, 430 ended up registering. See the number of messages. And then about a third of them already had a Unibuddy account, which is nice to see a good mix of people who had already been engaging and then new folks to this engagement platform.
Definitely.
So yeah.
Shall I go to the next slide?
Yeah. This will just kind of show you, I think it's one conversation in particular that we had, it'd probably be impossible to see, but with a student who was asking questions about, I really want to play soccer, where do I get involved? And other people were chiming in. And I think this also highlights one of the beauties of this platform versus some of the other ones that we've been using, where if you're inviting new students, they lose all of that historic information. But being able to invite new folks and then be able to scroll through and see some of these messages, I think is really, really powerful. Even if they don't engage themselves, they're at least witnessing the past conversations that maybe they weren't admitted for in time to witness them, but they can always scroll back. I think it's a really, really great benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next slide.
Yeah, for sure. This one's kind of talking about some of the benefits and why we didn't like this batch invitation. So we have, like most of you who are in the US, probably we have an early action and a regular decision deadline. So we did one batch of early action and we did one batch of regular decision invites to the Unibuddy community platform. One aspect that's a little bit outside of the batch, but the first point on there is about the invitations. I think the feature that we really appreciated was being able to toggle off the Unibuddy generated invitations. I don't know if I really cared, but our communication teams definitely cared. They're like, I want to be in control of the branding. I want to be able to put it into the timing so we could add everybody as a user, but not notify them, and then have them be invited at our pace or whenever we wanted to, which was really, really helpful for us. The comm team really loved that. It also allowed us to run our data-driven analysis of our communications through Slate, which is what we use, as opposed to not really sure who opened what email or when it was opened or how many bounce backs did we have, all of that type of thing. So that feature was really, really nice for us to use. And then the second thing is, for sure. And the second thing was we did do a new student engagement So we invited a first batch, we had a huge surge, and the plan was to then invite this other batch of students for regular decision that would kind of touch on both point 2 and 3, that
Right.
we would have this chance to bring these other students in who would then be able to witness all of these conversations we had previously. And then we were hoping that that would kind of re-engage or re-energize this cohort of students that we had who had already been, which was definitely the case from the last webinar, where we saw this spike in activity. And then we kind of saw a decline after probably a month, 2 to 3 weeks. We saw this decline. And then we were hoping that at that time we'd be able to bring in a new batch of students and then kind of re-energize. I think for a lot of reasons, our second invite was delayed a little bit. And I think the lessons learned we had was that timing is everything. That for us, timing of creating content in these communities, which we didn't really plan on doing, we were wanting to play a more passive role in these communities. But I think what happened was once we had that initial really positive flux of activity, I think there were ways that we could have like kept that decline from being so steep, and knowing when students would like automatically be logged out of their Unibuddy Community app, and knowing when we would need to bring them back in to keep them stay in, so that notifications would come through. So I think we maybe left a little bit too much time because our second bump of activity wasn't as great, I think, as the first one was. So I think we had a few lessons learned about, okay, how do we keep involvement? How do we keep engagement during that lull period? And then we bring in the new students. How do we do that at a time when A, they're ready to be involved in something, and B, I think we waited a little bit too long because I think they actually found other methods of connecting with students. We heard from our individual appointments that they're finding other folks on Reddit. They found the Discord server. And so since we were inviting, I think we invited maybe at the very end of March. And so I think maybe by that point, a lot of these admitted students had already found an outlet for their contact that wasn't Unibuddy Community. So that was a lesson that we learned, that we really need to work on timing and have that much more defined as we roll out the communities. Anyway.
That's great. No, I appreciate that. I was going to ask, it's like you read my mind there too. Like,
so yeah, so that's where that's kind of like leads us up to like right where we are now, where we have this community. It's active-ish. And so now we're kind of looking to the future as we're coming up on May 1st. There's going to be a little bit more travel in India. So the next couple slides, we'll chat a little bit about what the future of our what we're hoping that Unibuddy Community would look like. There's probably like 4 main points on the next slide that we are hoping to leverage. I think one thing that we've done with our communication folks, especially with that second batch, is to adjust our communication to really leverage that idea of like FOMO, of saying like even having a snippet of the communication, or having a GIF that kind of scrolls through the chat back and forth, so students see that in their email and then are saying, wait, what's going on? What are they asking? And so then to be able to then, exactly. So then for them to be able to jump in, if we do more than just 2 batches, be able to leverage and utilize the conversations that are already happening to show students what they could experience. I think that might increase, especially with future later batches of invites, might increase our adoption and engagement.
I love that.
The other thing that we're really excited about or hoping for is to learn our lesson from segmenting a little bit too much. We heard a few comments actually in the community of students saying, where do I get in touch with other students that are not from down the street in Delhi or up the road in Seoul? And so we kind of had this moment of like, oh man, like, of course you're studying abroad for a reason. You're not studying abroad to like go to school in Delhi or go to school in Taipei. You're studying abroad to meet with US citizens and students from all over the globe. So I think, and this kind of leads into the next groups rather than communities as well, but really to make sure that our cross-region community, we focus on having folks from all over the world in those communities, and then maybe having our groups focus on groups rather than communities, where we're not segmenting and excluding folks, but we're
Right.
allowing them to be within a space and then finding different areas to engage with other students from around the globe. I think are two aspects that we're looking forward to leveraging a little bit more, simply because I think we're excluding them from having some of those experiences with their colleagues. The other thing that this solves, hopefully will solve, something we mentioned before about this latency issue, where if we have students across all of these time zones, it will hopefully almost be like a continual conversation where their students hopefully won't be too annoying, because we all know how annoying those WhatsApp or like whatever notifications can be, but hopefully they'll continually see other students from around the globe throwing in comments, and they'll get notifications of that and be able to pop in a bit more consistently, as opposed to this huge batch response that we've been experiencing. So that's the cross region and the groups rather than communities. I think that would be really, really helpful. And the last thing that we're hoping for the future is simply having a bit more feedback from students, whether that's in the moment, so we can change and be as nimble as possible in the moment, or after their experience, and then attempt to adjust the approach for the next cycle. Doing surveys, asking students when they arrive on campus, did you know about the Unibuddy communities? If they didn't, why didn't you? Saying, because I don't check my email. Why would I check my email? Type thing. So we're hoping, yeah. So we're hoping that we can do a little bit of feedback to understand maybe some of the adoption, or if students say, or if we're hoping to ask students about when in the process would something like this, if you were involved, would you have preferred something like that as a prospective student? Would you have enjoyed something like that? So ask them a little bit of maybe field research, focus group type thing. So
totally.
Yeah, that's what we're looking forward to in the future.
I just love all of this really like rich information too, because I think these learnings that you've had are really relevant to even, folks who are going to do like just a domestic community as well, right? Because you may be inclined to say like, oh, we'll do an East Coast and a West Coast community. And that way, students from that area will be able to just talk to each other. And I think it's great to be able to say, well, maybe you just do groups underneath that full umbrella, so that everybody can kind of like, get in the mix with each other, which is totally awesome.
And if possible, not to foist anything or throw anything on your development group, but I think something that we would be really interested in is if we can have that as a community. There are some, and I'm sure everybody on the call is thinking about this as well, there are probably some ways of engagement that just don't make sense for it to be open, whether it's you want to have a scholar community, you have folks who like our business school, they have specific questions, which we would probably have open because students can do minors or certificates in business, but scholarships for sure. Or if there's any other type of specific exclusive, but we don't want it to be its own community, we still want it to be a group in of itself. If that was ever a feature, that I think that would really allow for us to kind of be all one, come all, and you have like your own unique groups. So
kind of space. I love it. Awesome. Well, we've been getting some questions in the Q&A space. Folks, if you would like to also add them into the chat, please feel free to do that. I'm going to really quickly just kind of give you the sneak peeks of things that are to come in the future of Unibuddy Community, and then I'll stop sharing my screen and we can really dive into those questions. But Seth, thanks so much for walking us through that. It is just awesome to hear of all of the things you did. And as always, I'm so appreciative of you as a partner. Like I said, just being willing to get stuck in and try things. It's so fun to work with you because you do that. So I love it. Jeez, we're just having a grand old time here. But all right, for the future of Unibuddy Community, everybody, we are all very excited about the latest launch, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. That's the template groups. So if you have community turned on your dashboard right now, you can actually go and experience this if you're interested in seeing what any of these template groups would look like. I also will put in my little plug. If you have been so inspired by everything that Seth has said that you're like, oh my gosh, I need to have community turned on so that I can give these things a try, reach out to your customer success manager. We're really happy to turn that on for you during the free trial period. So please do let us know if you're interested. And then we will also talk just very briefly about the exciting things that are up next for Unibuddy Community as well. So we are really stoked to have this Discover and Explore page be implemented as well. So this is going to help students find not only the most popular groups, so the things that are getting the most messages, but also things that are most relevant for them at the end of the day. So if they type in sports, they'll be able to see all of the channels that relate to sports, which I think will be really great and hopefully will help with what you were talking about, Seth, there with like the engagement and things like that. We will also have the ability for you to delete communities. So when the students do kind of, if they make their way out and you would like to get that community off of your dashboard, you'll be able to delete that. And you will also be able to feel more confident in that experimentation phase, right? You'll be able to say, oh, this didn't work. Let's check it out in the bin, kind of a deal. And then last but not least, we are also going to be experimenting with direct messaging as well. So this is something that we're really excited to get feedback on from you all. If this is something that you would be interested in the community space, basically allowing students to talk one-to-one with other students, staff, ambassadors, all of the good stuff there. So that is the end of our slides. I will just briefly put my email up here. If you do have any additional questions or things that you would like to ask me personally about, I'm very happy to answer those via email. And now I'll go ahead and just stop sharing my screen. And Seth, we have a ton of questions for you. So I'm going to read some of these out for you, and let's see how this goes. So Daniel asks, you talk about content pushed in the communities for retention. What type of content had good engagement? We thought actually it would be better to leave them to it and ship in with information, but interesting to hear this.
Yeah, that was a little bit of, we went back and forth about this because we didn't want it to sound like too cheesy, like for a staff member to go into an ISA member and say, hey, could you tell us a little bit about your blah, blah, blah? It felt like a little bit too forced. So we, I think, came around to the idea of pushing content a little bit later. And for our purposes, probably a little bit too late, because Daniel, I think we had the exact same vibe as you of just let them do their thing and they'll ask the questions and it's going to be great. And it was for the initial push. So I think if we could do it over again, our strategy would have been, we would have some kind of pre-packaged content. And I'll tell you what we had come up with for the next round in the back pocket. We would have like let the initial excitement from admitted students and the ISA members, or national student ambassadors, kind of ride the first wave. And then as we saw stuff decline, I think we would have encouraged our international student ambassadors to unsolicitedly offer some information. So be like, I just felt like I should really tell you about my living experience during my first year, if that didn't come up during the organic time of back and forth, or tell them about your internship experience, anything that we know historically that has been hot topics of questions. We were getting ready to have those as like content that we would push. It would maybe be a little awkward, but I also think it wasn't that awkward. It doesn't have to be like super overproduced where it has to be like a perfect Q&A. It's like just a student would drop in. So we have a shadow group me text thread with everybody who is joining these Unibuddy communities from our ISA members. So we have this back-end shadow group me where we'll say, hey, international student ambassador, would you be willing to just do a quick little blurb about your internship in the next 30 minutes? And then we would hit send and they would jump in, and we're planning on doing that. So that's what we would see. And we hadn't really seen what was the most engaging from those content pushes. I think most of it wasn't like people then had a lot of follow-up questions, but hopefully that notification pinged them. They logged back into Unibuddy Community and got a little, the goal for us was that they would just get used to checking it every 2 or 3 days. That was the goal for us, instead of popping to me like, okay, I have more questions about your internship or whatever have you.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's great. Awesome. Okay. So then we have a question from anonymous attendee here, who would like to know, do you have any recommendations for the maximum number of students that can or should be in a group for best practice? Does it become a bit chaotic / unmanageable after there are too many participants? So I feel like we could kind of tag team this one if you want to, but what do you think in terms of your experience with your admitted students?
So we had about 80 students in that India one, which was the most robust or the most active. And sometimes at the very beginning, it felt a little chaotic, but when we were talking with our ISA members, I think we were like, oh my gosh, are you comfortable with that? Do we need to ask more people to come in? And they kind of looked at us like, what are you talking about? Like, I have 80 different groups with all of my classes. I like live on my phone. Like, this is nothing that they can't, as international student ambassadors, navigate. I think for us, it may have been a little bit more hectic than it was for the ISA members. So we, even though it was a little bit frightening when we invited the large numbers, we took a note from, is it James? Who is the Wales person that's in the lab?
Andy. Yeah.
Andy.
Oh Andy.
Sorry, Andy, if you're on this call or you watch this recording, you did a great job. Hopefully me not remembering your name doesn't reflect poorly on your actual,
you remembered what he said. That's very important, I think.
Because I think when he was saying like, we're just going to invite everybody, and that caused a lot of anxiety for me. I'm like, oh my God. But I think it turned out that that wasn't that overwhelming. Even when we had 80 active users in there, it didn't feel that bad. We just had to make sure that we were scrolling through and catching everything that we didn't answer, especially waking up and having a whole list and having to read through what had happened while we were asleep. So it didn't really feel that, it was a little hectic, but it didn't feel unmanageable to have at least, it was around 80 and they were very active. And for each one of those, I don't know if other people have asked this, but for each one of those, we decided for the India group to have 3 to 4 international student ambassadors in there. And then all of our recruitment staff, which is 4 of us, were in there. And then we had like a lead, someone who was taking charge of that India group. So there was a lead staff member who would, if somebody needed to answer a question, they would jump over to the group meet and call out an ISA member who we know maybe had that experience or could speak to that well. And so we would ask them to answer the question. So yeah, it was, for us, it was about 4 student ambassadors to about 80. And it didn't feel overwhelming. And then after that initial surge, it was definitely not overwhelming. It was 1 student could have handled that after the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I really liked the idea that you all had to have that kind of lead person in charge of the communities too. And so I think that would be the thing that I would just kind of add on to what you've already said, is on the back end, just have those conversations of like, you have a team of students, maybe have one of your like lead team members, if you will, from the students be the one who's kind of like helping nudge folks so that it's not all on one individual person at the end of the day. So cool. All right. I love it. All right. So we've got another question here. So this says, I'm launching community groups for our admits tomorrow. These admits are over 50 plus nationalities. I was a little worried about the students in China specifically, and that they may not have been able to use this feature. I asked Unibuddy and they confirmed to me that the platform can be used in China and does bypass the firewalls. The platform is, and all features are fully functional in this region. So my question is, Seth, can you talk about your experience with the students from China using Unibuddy Community?
To be a short answer, we didn't roll it out to anyone in China. That wasn't for any system limitations. It was our own cowardice, maybe, to roll it out to 2, because maybe it's the same with you. Our Chinese student population is at a big public institution in the Midwest, is our largest applicant and admit pool. So we were a bit nervous that if we rolled it out there, we might have gotten a little bit overwhelmed. So I don't really have much experience, at least in the community side. For our WeChat groups that have happened previously, we have a graduate assistant in our office who does a lot of the pushing of the material on our WeChat group. So we've engaged with Chinese admitted students through that group, and it's been successful. We maybe had to push out a little bit more information, or it's a bit more common to have almost like press releases or updates or information pushing, as opposed to going back and forth with a lot of students, which still does happen, just a
Right.
bit more of us producing information as opposed to the back and forth that we had of, tell me about a student group, or I'm really interested in chess, can I do that while I'm there? We have a little bit less of that in our WeChat group than we had in the Indian Unibuddy community group.
Ah, that's awesome. Great insights. Thank you. All right. Yet another one. Here we go. All right. Seth, I'm curious of the utilization of Unibuddy Community for admitted students, correlating in terms of timing to the in-person yield events in those specific markets. Also, as you have gone to India, did you go to India or were you not able to go to India?
14 days, I leave.
14 days. That's right. Oh gosh, very exciting.
But someone else in our
Okay.
office did go to India, and they did some individual appointments in Bangalore, Jaipur, Kolkata. I think there was one more, which I'm blanking on. But yeah, so somebody has been there in March.
Love it. Okay. So basically, I think they're asking essentially like, did you use the Unibuddy communities when you traveled there, or are you planning on doing that? And have you discarded those and gone to WhatsApp or other social media groups?
Great question. We did not discard WhatsApp or other social media groups, but what we did was, for at least this pilot phase, we segmented. So our communication teams and us sat down, we said, what should we do? Should we get rid of the WhatsApp and WeChat group and move everything over? And as we're in this mode of kind of transition, or this mode of experimentation, for right now, we decided, let's have all of our admitted students up until May 1st exclusively use Unibuddy communities. Like, let's push that. And then if anyone, like Chinese students, will still use WeChat, since we're not focusing on them, since we're not able to travel there. So for India, at least, yes, we pushed as many students to use Unibuddy as we could. That was all the invites. That's where we're doing all of our outreach. And we haven't been promoting the WhatsApp community for this cycle, which may change for next cycle, depending on our post-mortem chat of what we feel like of Unibuddy communities versus WhatsApp. We're keeping the WhatsApp group for deposited students. So we think that will give us a good chance to say, okay, what happened with our admitted students in Unibuddy community, and what happened with our deposited students in WhatsApp? And are we seeing a difference? And so then we can sit down and say, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to have this Unibuddy extend, or do we want to pull WhatsApp back? So we have yet to have that conversation. It's been pretty nice to be able to send messages in Unibuddy community to hype folks up and say, we're on our way, blah, blah, blah. Keep an eye out in your email for something. We'll be in your city, in your country. That's been nice to use as promotion through the Unibuddy community. But right now, we haven't gone all in one way or the other.
Well, that's great. I love it. All right. Somebody asked if I could share my email, so I'm just going to pop that in the chat really quickly before I ask you another question here. So, all right. So we've got a question here that says, my campus currently uses GroupMe as a platform for students to connect and chat, and the offerings seem very similar to what has been shown here. What advantages does Unibuddy Community offer over competitors like GroupMe? And so, I mean, I can speak just really briefly to the fact that Unibuddy Community is intentionally a very private space for just the folks that you invite, and just the folks that you invite via their actual email addresses. And I think also kind of a thing that you mentioned earlier, Seth, it's a little bit of increased privacy for your ambassadors as well, right? So they're not going to need to share any of their personal phone numbers, and actually not really any of their personal emails, unless they choose to do that within the community space. So basically, it's just a little bit more secure, a little bit more, safe. And also it allows kind of this, I think, air of I'm not going to say professional interactions, but it's a little bit more official potentially, because it comes branded, especially when you do it like you all did from IU Bloomington, and you can choose to kind of send it out the way that you would like to. Does that feel like I've hit kind of a lot of those points that would kind of differentiate, Seth, or do you feel like there are some other things that, yeah?
100%. I think the other thing that we were pleasantly surprised about is well, to back up a little bit, the biggest goal is to meet students where they're at while also maintaining our own privacy and security and feeling like we're doing the reporting we need to do. So if we could do all the reporting and everything was set up perfectly for privacy, maybe WhatsApp is the best thing, at least in India, because everybody already uses it. But once we say, if that doesn't really meet all of our other security goals or other reporting goals that we have, then 33% of the people who are on our community has already been using Unibuddy. So it's one step closer. As long as we are promoting in the prospective student arena, let's promote the Unibuddy individual direct messaging with our ambassadors. They're already a little bit used to it. And we've been finding, at least with our high school students, not very many international high school students know what GroupMe is. So it's really, really ubiquitous on a college campus with, you have one for every single one of your classes. But before you enroll, we're seeing that a lot of high school students just don't know what that is. So it's one more platform to adopt. You were using WhatsApp for everything. Maybe you sent a few messages in Unibuddy, and then now you're asking me to adopt a third platform. So our goal is to keep those as minimal as possible. But while still maintaining the, like we said, the secure, that what Paige had mentioned, the security protocol that we want for our students.
I love it. Awesome. Okay, Seth, you had mentioned timing to keep the group engaged, and this advice of creating content. Can you speak a little bit more on that? And so maybe, can you tell us a little bit about like how long it was in between admits to the point when you invited them to the communities? You can be vague if you don't want to give away trade secrets there, but
no, not at all. So our early action date is November 1st. So we wanted to get through all those applications. So we had a good group of students. I should have actually pulled up to see when our first community invite went out, or first community messages went out. But what we did was we tried to get it as the first invite as close to that date as possible. So we wanted to make sure that students were able to connect, not right on the heels of, but we wanted them to connect as close to their admission date as possible. That didn't feel too like on top of each other. So I think, so it's end of March, November, January. I think we sent stuff out right after the new year, because our January, we were getting through applications. We were making sure that we had scholarships out and that all the other information from students was settled. So then we started with our first batch. I believe it was in late or mid January, I believe. I'll have to take a look at it again. So we put that first one out in the new year. Students are back from their, winter holiday if they had one, and we thought that would be a really good time to start and engage with folks. Maybe we could have done that a little bit earlier to try to catch them before a winter holiday or over their winter holiday. And then the second batch went out just a few months ago, or just a few weeks ago. So I think that we saw, timing wise, we saw engagement that hit for maybe 2 to 3 weeks, where everybody was going back and forth on their own organically. And then after that, it started to decline. So in my mind, I would have probably said we put something out, and then we plan probably every after 2 weeks to do something, I don't want to say big, but to do some content creation. And then maybe not 2 weeks later, but then maybe a week later, and then it's every couple days, and attempting to keep people engaged. And then honestly, knowing when to say, okay, they're done. They've like moved on.
They've done.
Because
they're good.
Yeah. Like what you had heard from the previous webinar, students were sharing their Instagram accounts, sharing their Discord servers, sharing their Reddit, their subreddit. So like they were also saying, I already use this. I want all my friends to come over to this other platform. And it feels a little sleazy to say, like, you cannot do this. We asked our ISA members, we asked our ISA members not to do that. Don't share your personal stuff for certain reasons. But the other students were like, well, we're not going to stop you from doing that. So
awesome. Oh my goodness, we got so many great questions, Seth. There is no way we are going to get through all of these within the last 3 minutes that we have here. And so to the folks in the audience, thank you all so much for truly sticking with us throughout basically the entire hour. Seth, you're such an engaging person to talk to. Like all of these people wanted to stay and hang out with you. But hopefully we'll be able to get you the answers to your questions via email or some other way. But what I really wanted to ask you, Seth, just as kind of like my final question for you, which I'm going to take the honor of asking because I'm the moderator and I can do that at this point, is can you tell us a little bit about what got you excited about community in the first place?
What we saw was the opportunity. We work in an environment at a university, at Indiana University, where it seems like we try to put 7 systems together to do one thing. So it feels very disjointed, and it feels like I'm sure a lot of folks on this call are feeling the same way, that you're trying to bring multiple things together. And as an admissions officer, you kind of feel like this hub of knowing what the entire university is doing and trying to coordinate it all to make the prospective student kind of see one university, as opposed to, oh, we don't do that, go talk to this office. Oh, we don't do that, go talk to this office. And so what we were excited about community is it would be a place that prospective students or admitted students would treat as their kind of one stop, or it would be considered their go-to for going to the hive mind of other prospective students or other IU international student ambassadors or other staff members. That's what we were excited about, is it allowed us to be organized and invite people, but it would get closer and closer to the sense of, I know there's 50 million email addresses, there's 50 million offices on your campus. I am getting booted around to all of them, but I know if I go to this Unibuddy community, I'll have one place where I'll have students, I'll have staff, I can bring in other people, and this is where I'm going to get all my questions answered. That was really exciting to us. And whatever stage it is in their funnel, whatever stage it is in their process, they would still treat the community as their first stop. And selfishly, that means that we have a little bit of control over that message of how it's presented, as opposed to, we love everybody in all of our offices, but every now and then you don't really have control over what that person, the registrar or the bursar or in financial aid, is going to be telling the student. So maybe we're control freaks, but we really, really love that about it becoming like a one-stop shop for these students, especially at a really large public research university, where it can feel very impersonal, and it can feel like you call and all you get is bounced around from office to office. And it doesn't really feel like a home environment. So that was probably the biggest incentive for us to get involved in community.
I think that's the perfect way to end this webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. Seth, it's a joy to talk to you every time we get to
Always
chat. So thank you for being here. And I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday, wherever you are in the world. And like I said at the kind of midpoint of the webinar, if you do have questions about community that we weren't able to get to, please feel free to reach out to your customer success manager, or my email is in the chat. So reach out to me if you'd like to. Thanks so much. It was lovely to have you all here.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
everybody. Have a great day.